We've said this many times over here on the channel, but despite what people will say, losing is definitely not fun. But for today's video, we're going to discuss what elements that if the player loses leads to frustration, and what will probably get them to quit a game if it happens too often. If you've played or been part of the community of any roguelike, Souls-like, or any kind of very difficult game, you've probably heard people use the rallying cry of, losing is fun. And it's one of those terms that longtime fans of Game Wisdom know that I hate. Losing is not fun. If losing was fun, then it wouldn't be called losing, now would it? But for a more serious answer, when the player loses in a video game, several things are pulled or taken into account in terms of how hard that loss is. Now, when we use the term lose in this situation, we're referring to, again, the fail state in any video game. And if you don't know what that term is, the fail state is simply what happens if the player doesn't accomplish the win state. For instance, if you're playing Mario, win state would be get through a level. The fail state, don't get through a level. I know it's very complicated there. But the important aspect is that for any video game, there must always be a win and loss state. Just as the player must have a task they want to achieve, there must be something that can stop them or be at the mark, let them know that they did not achieve that task. That is universal. What isn't universal is the extent of the punishment that can occur when the player fails. And this is oftentimes the major point that determines the difficulty or the kind of the age group for a lot of these games. When we're talking about games meant for children or new players, the fail state or penalty is very minor. You fall into a pit, you're going to reappear right where you just fell. No muss, no fuss, you just keep going at it. If you fail in a game like XCOM or a roguelike, you could be potentially losing minutes, hours of play, or your favorite characters and gear that you've built up over how many runs and so on. And for a lot of these games, a high punishment is a major part of their appeal. For myself, I can't play an ARPG anymore on what's considered softcore difficulty. I need that Iron Man, a sword of Damocles over my head to keep myself from not falling asleep while playing a game like Diablo, Path of Exile, Grim Dawn, and so on. But when does losing become a pain, and when does it stop people from playing a game? This is something that is both a design kind of discussion, as well as more of a psychological one, depending upon the person and their own attitudes. For myself, I have a very high degree of, pain, I guess is the right term here, as I will play games pretty much that hit my head against that wall until I get through it. As I did with Sekiro up there, as I'm sure a few of you have done with games like FTL, Soulsborne, or any number of these titles. But just as there are people who will do that, there are those who will give up. That the second it gets difficult or it gets frustrating, the hands go up, controller goes down, they're moving on to another game. And there's definitely discussions here about playability and accessibility that we're not going to get into today. That can be its own video. But what drives people to quit a game like this when it gets too difficult or too punishing is a very important point about game design, and especially when you're trying to make a game that's going to keep people invested in it. Now, a few minutes ago, I brought up again the term about punishment, or what is loss when you fail in a game. And typically there's only two ways that a designer can make the player feel that loss. Through time or through progress. And both are not that good to go for. They're not really good to use if you're trying to motivate someone to keep playing. So we're going to talk about time first, and then we're going to talk about progress after we do our Patreon shout out. But time is an essential part of any video game, not just in terms of the length of the game, but how much we're willing to play that game. For some of us, we can have extra hours in a day that we can spend getting stuck on a really hard section, having to grind for 3 to 4 hours. For other people, however, if you have a life, work, career, family, etc., you can't exactly tell them, hey, I'm stuck at this boss in Sekiro, I need an extra 5 hours of solitude to figure out its pattern. And time is one of those things that as a designer, you have to really play around, especially in today's market with so many games being released. And we've seen a lot of gamers these days kind of shy away from lengthy or time-consuming experiences. The days of everyone enjoying an 80 to 120 hour RPG are few and far between, especially when there's all these other games being released. And when we talk about games such as in the mobile or free-to-play category that kind of demand your attention through real-time events, raids, or anything like that, that can also come back to hurt the player, especially when you have a group of people. And this has always been one of the things that's kept me from playing a lot of MMOs or high-level play in them, that I don't have the time and I don't want to commit the time to play a game for a fixed period. For people who are longtime fans of mine, you know how much I hate real-world timers in games, where if the game says it's going to take 3 hours of your time, it is literally going to take a 3-hour chunk of your day. So it's again one of the things why I stopped playing a lot of MOBAs, that I can't, with my schedule, commit to like a forced kind of play unless I'm doing a stream of it. So I can't, guarantee that I will be available Thursday at exactly 3 p.m. from 3 to 6 to do this raid or anything like that. Now, when it comes to punishment, though, when the player loses time, it can be very annoying to have to get back to that portion. And we've seen this in stuff like when we were playing Ninja Gaiden on the stream. They Are Billions is an example that will be coming up again in a few minutes. And again, if the player knows what they have to do and they have to repeat content to get back to that point, then that is just wasted time. And this is why many of the best games, and even these Souls-likes, will always allow the player to shortcut or find checkpoints before anything major, and of course after that as well. Just imagine how it would feel if you beat a boss in a Dark Souls game, walk forward, die, and then that boss respawns and you have to fight him again before you get to the next checkpoint. Many people will probably throw their controllers against the wall or through the TV. But when you're trying to punish the player, many developers will go through the progress route. And progress can mean different things depending upon the design, and it's a very complicated matter to discuss. But before we get to that, as I was saying, we're going to have a quick shout out to our Patreon supporters and sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at They Are Billions and how the game, I think, fails in terms of being a little too punishing for its kind of gameplay. And now for a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters and current Game Wisdom sponsors. If you would like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, link down below. When we talk about the loss of progress in a game, that can mean different things depending upon the design. And like I was saying in the last part, this is a very important thing to understand from a design standpoint. So progress comes in two forms. The first is actually getting through content in a game. As in, if I lose in a level, I must replay that entire level again. As in, that progress I've done is wiped, and I must now do the same thing to then get back to that point. And this is where They Are Billions definitely struggles with the fact that it has Iron Man saving. In what you're about to see in probably the next 20 seconds, I'm going to lose this map because the game told me they were coming from the north, but not in the position that I was expecting. And when that happens, I am going to be forced to replay this entire level over again. The problem, and when it comes to the loss of progress, is that everything that I've done up until this point must be repeated. Basically, I'm forced to replay this game or replay this level, and all my progress is gone. This is a similar issue that we saw again with something like Ninja Gaiden, that when you lose, the act of punishment or forcing the player to replay the entire final series of levels at the end of those games is way too punishing for that kind of design, because it forces the player to essentially have to redo everything they did to get back to the point as to why they failed. And if they didn't learn that lesson or they didn't learn it fast enough, guess what? They're going to have to repeat it again and again, and you get the picture. And again, I'm sorry I said again too many times there, but for a lot of these games, or the hardest games, know that the punishment mechanic cannot be too extreme. When we look at the Souls-likes, for instance, what makes them work and why they're still held as examples of good design is the fact that when you lose, you are able to immediately get back to where you were. And that does two things. One, it cuts down on the player having to repeat content that they've already done, and allows them to quickly and hopefully start to adjust as to why they lost. And being able to learn from losing is an essential part of its design. I am a strong believer in the fact that you learn from loss. Rather, you learn more from loss than you do from victories. But if the player is not able to learn from why they lost, whether it's because they lost due to circumstances completely out of their control, or that the game doesn't allow them to learn because they're forced to replay content, then it's going to get too frustrating for them to play. Now, the other point about loss, and this is something that we see in a lot of persistent-minded games, is the idea of the downward spiral. As in, I lose, therefore I don't go back to zero, I go back even further than that. Maybe I've permanently lost resources or experience or my favorite gear. And in response, the game now becomes harder to play. And this is, again, the downward spiral. I lose, therefore I'm going to keep losing, and I'm basically going to fail because of one mistake. And again, the moral for today is that the player should always, there's two things. The player should always feel like they are the ones in control as to why they lost. And second, they need to understand why they lost. Now, with what you just saw there at the end of that map, that there was nothing I could have done. I think right now I'm trying I'm trying to kill the game in order to try and get around that loss. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work. But the point is that loss right there, I was not in control over why I lost. The game told me they were coming from the north. I prepared my defenses on the north side. They came around to the east side. And that is the fault of the game itself not properly explaining those elements. And I know this is very exciting as the game loads up there. But when the player loses, and they are not the ones in control over it, they're going to feel that it's the game's fault, and they're not going to learn how to improve. Again, the beauty of Souls-likes is that you are very much often able to tell why you lost. Maybe I didn't block that attack right. Maybe I didn't dodge all three of that guy's combo hits. But I'm able to adjust and adapt. When the player is not able to do that, they're going to end up getting frustrated and quit. And when the player is actually lost, or they're worse off than they were before, it's going to basically be throwing salt on the wound. And this is why one thing that I always say about loss in roguelikes is that despite the overwhelming punishment of losing your entire state in a roguelike design, it's still not as bad as losing in a linear game or in something like They Are Billions here. And the reason is simple. These games are meant to be replayed. They are meant to give you a different experience on each playthrough, so that when you lose, you are going to get something brand new. In a game like They Are Billions, however, if I lose on the campaign map, I still have to do the exact same thing. So I'm wasting not only time, but also progress. And when both are happening at the same time, that creates a lot of investment, or you're asking the player to invest a lot of their time into your game. And if there's not much there to convince them to stick around, or that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, they're going to give up playing. So, with that said, we're going to wrap things up here for today. My final question for you watching: can you think of titles where the loss was too extreme? That you just got tired of this game, no matter how great the rest of the game was? And can you think of games that could have used a stronger penalty for losing to kind of try and keep you invested in it? Because we've seen some titles where if there is no penalty or no risk of failure, it can get very boring. Like I said earlier with the RPG examples, that when I know I can just literally send my character to their death 100 times and I'll still win, it just gets very boring for me. But understanding how far you can go with your punishment is definitely done on a design by design basis. And it's not something that one size fits all on. But thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. If you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.